Welcome to Two Bees in a Podcast, brought to you by the Honeybee Research and Extension Laboratory at the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. It is our goal to advance the understanding of honeybees and beekeeping, grow the beekeeping community, and improve the health of honeybees everywhere. In this podcast, you'll hear research updates, beekeeping management practices discussed, and advice on beekeeping from our resident experts, beekeepers, scientists, and other program guests. Join us for today's program, and thank you for listening to Two Bees in a Podcast.
We've got a great episode today for you all in Two Bees in a Podcast. First, we're joined by Dewey Caron and Dr. Delaney, who will be talking to us about the BeeMD database. It's similar to WebMD, so we'll discuss what that is and how beekeepers can use it. That segment will be followed by Chris Hiatt, a commercial beekeeper and the Vice President of the American Honey Producers Association. He will be discussing some of the National Association's initiatives on behalf of beekeepers around the U.S. Of course, we will end our podcast with a question and answer segment from you all, our listeners.
All right, guys, so welcome back to Two Bees in a Podcast. We've got a really good treat for you. We're actually interviewing two people today, and these people are both experts on so many things, but what the two of them and I have in common is that we all worked jointly on a project called the BeeMD. So we're going to be introducing you to that. And the two individuals who we have here today to discuss the BeeMD with us, Dr. Dewey Caron, and Dr. Caron is a professor emeritus of entomology and wildlife ecology from the University of Delaware. He retired from there in 2009. He moved out to Oregon to be close to some of his kids. And while there, he is also an affiliate faculty member of Oregon State University. He remains active with bees. I see him at meetings. I hear about him. I read his stuff still, so I know he's quite active. And we also have Dr. Debbie Delaney, who is an associate professor of entomology and wildlife ecology, also at the University of Delaware. Dewey and Debbie, thank you guys so much for joining us on Two Bees in a Podcast.
Well, thank you.
Hope you guys are both doing well. I guess, Debbie, you're out in Delaware, and Dewey, I guess you're calling in from Oregon?
From Oregon, that's correct.
Yep.
All right, great. That's great. So we've got people from all over the place today. We got every corner of the country covered at the moment. Amy, what do you think about that?
I think that's pretty cool. Wait, every corner?
Well, there's only three corners, right?
Oh, my goodness.
Oh,
God.
And Dewey and Debbie, you'll just have to kind of put up with us. Amy and I occasionally cut up on the podcast, and actually people remark about my dad jokes and all the stuff that end up on the podcast. So if we say something that we laugh at, we're trying to be funny, even if you guys aren't laughing. So just kind of giving you a heads up.
We think we're pretty funny.
So back to the task at hand. We brought you guys in. We could really talk to you about any number of things. You're both experts on so many things and have distinguished careers. But Debbie and Dewey, we brought you in specifically to talk about the BeeMD today. But before we get into that, just for the benefit of our listeners, I'm curious if you could just briefly tell us about yourselves, how you got into beekeeping, and how you ended up where you are. And to keep this from being overly awkward, I think, Debbie, we'll just start with you and do what she's done. If you'll just jump in and kind of give us a brief overview of your past. So, Debbie, how'd you get where you are? How'd you get into bees? Let's just start there.
All right. Well, actually, it was a roundabout path. And I started off as a general fine art major at an art university. And I mainly focused on drawing humans, and I started to switch to other things, insects being one of them, and plants. And I realized that I didn't really foresee myself having a career as a struggling artist. That's just not something that I wanted art to be something that I did not for money, but just because I love to do it. So I dropped out of art school and went to the University of Oregon State, where Dewey is now. We kind of flip-flopped. And I took every ology course possible. I took dendrology, mycology, entomology, botany, I mean, you name it, because I was just I wanted to dabble and see what was exciting to me. And when I took general entomology, it was a no-brainer. I just absolutely was like, this is it. I'm obsessed. I just loved learning about all these different insects. And then there was a small, I think 2 class periods where we went out to the apiary. Dr. Burgett was there at that time. And I couldn't believe that you could open a colony and touch these bees and have these amazing smells wafting out. And it just, I knew that was exactly what I wanted to do. So immediately I got a hive, and then I think the next year I had double that, and then all of a sudden I had 20, then more, and then was making honey and selling it, and making camels and selling them, and then I got involved in research. So that's kind of how I got involved in beekeeping, and I still do it to this day, and I love it.
I think that's neat that you started off at art school and then you decided to move into bees. I think that's really neat. You saw the light, right? You ended up gravitating towards the thing that was your destiny.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Deborah in Hebrew means honeybee. So it was my destiny.
That was just perfect.
How did it take you so long to figure this out, Debbie?
I don't know.
Well, Dewey, what about you? How'd you get into this whole thing with bees?
Well, I guess I was a kid that loved nature, being brought up in a very rural area of southern Vermont. Went to the University of Vermont as a chemistry major, and the long labs, and finally PChem did me in. I'd taken an ecology course, and I kind of fell into study of biology, kind of literally. In this ecology course, we went to a river, and I fell in. We went to Lake Champlain, and I fell into that. And we went to a bog, and I fell into that too.
Good heavens, Dewey, remind me not to go hiking with you.
I was about to say. Did someone put a stick in front of your foot?
I know. It's like every time I walk up
it was, students in college, and that was the thing. You had to get right into your subject. You really, the enthusiasm was there. So I stayed with the biology. When I started a PhD at Cornell, you sort of select a subset of what entomology is. And of course, 3/4 of all living things are insects. And my interest was still the ecology and more in keeping things alive. And honeybee, apidology was just natural in that we were studying populations and their relationships to nature and within themselves as well. And we could keep them alive. We didn't want to do it to kill them, to develop the newest and best new material of how to get rid of them. When I went to my first position at the University of Maryland, interacted extensively with what was then and still is the U.S. Department of Agriculture bee lab at Beltsville. And they had a number of specialists that worked on pests. Had done a lot of work with nosema, had done extensive work with the fowl broods, et cetera. And initially started out with an interest of these things that affect populations of bees, looking at some of the traditional situations such as the diseases, the gut disease of nosema, et cetera. I went to Delaware in '81 as a department chairman. And stayed, and among many of the different things that I did at Delaware were bees and pollinating insects and biocontrol. And now that I'm retired, I have a chance to just concentrate on the bees, so I've continued to do that.
That's amazing. I love hearing all of our guests' stories of how they got into beekeeping, because every person has their own story, and it's just so fascinating to see, like what you've done with your careers, and it's just amazing to see that.
Well, I kind of half expected Dewey to say I fell into a hive. That's how it happened, Dewey. It was kind of anticlimactic there. I thought that's where you were headed.
No. Although, one of the things you always have that in the back of your mind, bees, of course, they sting. So, whoa, do I want to get into that? And when I went to my interview at Ithaca with Dr. Roger Morse, I mentioned, I can't recall last time I got stung. And he says, well, we can fix that. And next thing I know, we're out in a beehive and he's having a bee sting me. So,
the way
the acid test
used to be.
Yeah, the acid test.
Yeah.
He was very straightforward as a major professor. Great mentor.
All right. So we brought you guys on to talk about BeeMD, which is like the equivalent of WebMD, but for bees, right? So I was wondering if you guys could tell me how it came to be, who thought of this idea, kind of the history behind it, and what is it? What is BeeMD?
Well, I'll start, and Dewey, you can chime in. the very beginnings of BeeMD were just kind of discussions at a North American pollinator protection meeting, if I remember correctly. And I think the initial idea was Jamie's, honestly, and Dennis Van Engelsdorp. They were talking about how nice it would be to have a tool for beekeepers in the field, new beekeepers who could diagnose things that are going on in their colony, and have it be picture-based so that they could actually compare what they're seeing in their hive to something on an online tool. And there was a lot of discussions at first of how, like, first off, how much it would cost and who would develop it. And for, I think, many NAPSI meetings, I can't remember, we would kind of talk about it. But then slowly there began to be more momentum, and Jamie and Dennis started coming up with kind of a symptoms list, a very, very exhaustive symptoms list.
I'm sure.
Unfortunately, it has to be, because there are a lot of things that you can see in a hive. And then it was the work of getting pictures that would correspond to the different symptoms. And I brought in a good friend of mine who, Jordan Ambra, who runs Serenity Software, to start putting together the interface and the user kind of page for the BeeMD. And it really was, from Jamie's kind of conception, based off of WebMD, that you could put in symptoms and kind of then there would be this diagnosis that would come about, so the beekeepers could actually diagnose what's going on in their hives. And, I can't even remember how many years ago that was, Jamie. Do you remember?
Debbie, I don't. It's funny, sometimes when I get asked about it, it's just not clear to me, but it's probably, I even hesitate to guess. I was going to say it's been 5 to 8, maybe. I just can't remember.
Yeah, it was right after I came on to UD. So
okay.
That was like 2010.
Okay. Well, maybe longer then.
So it's been a long time coming. And I think over the years, different people have kind of come and put a lot of effort and input and heart and soul into it. And then, for various reasons, they've had to back out a little bit because stuff comes up, because this has all been volunteer for all of us. And so, Dewey, I'll let you kind of talk about how you became involved.
Okay, that was my recollection as well. I was working with the Pollinator Protection Group on a different angle at the time. We were working on a manual to help help educate people on pollination, the basics of pollination, and got involved extensively in developing a manual for grade schools, which, as Debbie indicates, all of this work was pretty much volunteer initially. As I saw the developing BeeMD, I love the concept because having taught entomology through the years, there are so many insects that it can be just, where do you start? It's just daunting. But the concept of the BeeMD is that you're asked contrasting questions. And so you select one, and that leads then to another contrasting question. You select one and another, and you select one. And at this point, with the skill of Jamie and Debbie and some other very talented people, those questions had been pretty much refined, so that without going through hundreds of questions in a very small number, you were down to something that might be real world, what people might actually see in their colonies. And the emphasis from the beginning was on visual. As I came into it, I saw that once you landed at what would be close to a decision or a final decision, we had visuals, but we didn't have language of what it might then round out. So really, what in that photo, what in that situation should you look at specifically, concentrate on? And that's how I got involved, trying to write up those ultimate descriptions. and did a lot of searching in my database for some of the slides, and tried to help contribute it in that manner. The other thing that really struck me with this is that there's a lot of bad guys out there, but there's some things that are unusual that we see in bees. And the more closely you look, the more unusual things you'll see.
I wasn't sure if you were talking about people or honeybees or their pets.
Both here.
He was talking about me.
A lot of unusual beekeepers
I was afraid to say it.
Our present company not accepted at all. But so this also has an emphasis on finding, describing, and finding things that are not the bad guys, but are unusual and pique the interest of those beekeepers that are in their bees and are looking and see these things. It's not all bad.
So you guys are right. Since my name's been invoked, I want to add to what you guys just said. So you guys recall correctly, or at least as much as my memory is, how this was born. The idea was just what you stated. It's very simple. Can we give a tool to beekeepers that when they go to their colony, they can use this tool to quickly diagnose what they're seeing? And Dewey, you're spot on with that last comment. As someone who does a lot of extension, as the two of you do as well, I'm constantly asked questions about colonies where the answers are, don't worry, it's normal. For example, it's June now when we're recording this episode, and it's hot. So bees are going to start bearding in Florida. So I'm going to start getting emails in the next few weeks. My bees have these clusters at the entrance. What's going on? And it's okay to say, hey, what you're seeing is normal. So built into this tool is just what you said, Dewey, this idea where, you click on these signs of things that you're seeing, and sometimes the answer is, hey, this is normal. It's within the range of behaviors that you could expect bees to do. And that's, I think, sometimes what people need. Sometimes when you see something, I think back when I was a brand new father for our first kid, it's like, well, is this normal? Is this normal? Is this normal? Is the kid okay? Is he going to be all right? And sometimes people just need to be reassured, don't worry, this is within the realm of things that these things should be doing. It's okay. And so that's one of the things that we tried to develop into the tool. And Dewey, you're right. When you joined the team, Debbie and Dennis and I had come up with these good signs of disease or signs of things that are normal. But oftentimes I happen to be a consumer of extension information. My wife and I grow blueberries and peaches and stuff in the backyard. And sometimes when we read informational documents, we feel like there's not enough information at the tail end to help us make that final decision. So, when you came on, we were able to, this tool, when people go in and click these conditions, it's able to kind of get them to a list of candidate things that might be happening. It might be this, or might be this, or might be this. But ultimately, we felt like we needed people to be able to get to that last little, okay, now this is how you can determine if it's this, or this. And that's, Dewey, kind of where you came in. You provided that text, that context, so that people can say, well, I've got three options. It's either, American foul brood or varroa, or my colony being perfectly okay. So how am I going to know which of these three it is? And, you've provided that text. If it's American foul brood, you might see these other things. If it's varroa, you might see these other things. And I think that's particularly useful because, people might be going to this website and simply clicking on boxes of conditions that they're seeing, but they may not know that there's other things that they could look for associated with that condition. And that's where your text come in, Dewey. It says, here's a lot of what we know about this condition. You've checked these things, but you might also look for these things to help further know what you're seeing. So that's, kind of with that background, I just wanted to ask, Debbie, in your case, since you work closest with the software developer, I want to ask you specifically, what happens to the user when they get to the website? You might even mention, I'll tell you what, I'll save you the trouble. The website for the BeeMD is thebeemd.com, thebeemd.com. And that's important to distinguish from BeeMD.com because that's something else entirely.
But it's also BEE, not just the letter B.
That's right. So I will spell it out for you. TheBeemD.com. All right. So Debbie, assuming they did all of that correctly and they land on the homepage,
yes,
what do they do from there?
So this is where I was probably most involved with this process, and it was figuring out the areas in which a beekeeper might experience something that they are questioning or something that they want to ask about. And so when you get to the BeeMD, you can kind of click on where you are seeing the issue or the concern, be it in the hive, in the brood, with your queen. There's all different kind of categories that are there for you to click on, and then you can kind of narrow down within that category, and it'll give you different types of symptoms that are associated with that category. So if it's in your honey super, you would click in the honey super, etc. And so really it was kind of going through and linking different conditions with different areas in the hive, and then linking symptoms with the different conditions with the different areas in the hive. So that's kind of the back end of how the site was developed in cooperation with the developer. And, that took a while because, as you both know, there's some conditions that can mean a couple of different things depending on what it is. So,
Sure.
You can have certain things in your brood that could mean a couple of different possible scenarios in terms of bacterial infections, etc. And so that's where the tool constantly had to be refined, and really so that you could narrow down to what you are actually hopefully seeing in your hive. One thing that I wanted to comment on that you started talking about, Jamie, in response to Dewey's comment, was that, when we first started out beekeeping, we would go in our hives, look at things, and then, I don't know about you, I'm assuming that you guys probably did this as well. You'd go straight to your army or, of books to look things up. What is this? And looking up, what am I seeing in here? This isn't right, And then, finally you might find a spot in your text where it's like describing what you're seeing, and then you kind of get that reassurance. And I think that's what's really nice about the BeeMD, especially now that Dewey has kind of added this information. It's an educational resource, and it is a kind of a reassurance to beekeepers. They're learning what they're seeing in their hive. They're learning about other things as well when they're looking up their initial concern. And they're getting this kind of reassurance about what's going on in their hive. And so it really is an educational tool. And I don't think we necessarily thought of it that way at first. I think we just more wanted it to be maybe a tool to help alleviate some of the phone calls we get as extension
Yeah.
so that that they could kind of look and figure out these things for themselves. But that's kind of how it initially started on the design front when I was working with Jordan, is just organizing it into these different kind of nested levels within the hive to get to
and Debbie, that's just like spot on. Before we asked another question, I think that's spot on. We tried to make it as simple as possible, right? When people go to the beemd.com, well, they're just given 6 choices. Does it occur in the adults? Does it occur with the brood? Does it occur in the colony? Is it a honey issue? Is it an internal hive issue or an external hive issue? And they just click on one of those, and then they get asked a series of questions, or conditions, sunken cappings with holes, then so on. And you just click the things that you saw, right? Mm-hmm. It's that simple. It's just really simple. And then once they push enter, it goes to, here's these options. It's a 80% match with varroa. It's a 50% match with starvation. It's a 10% match with, foul brood. And then you click on all 3 of those, read the text that Dewey and others provided and edit it, and it helps you kind of narrow down. And you're right, Debbie. It's just that tool to help people hopefully have some confidence in what they're seeing and know how to diagnose the issue.
Yeah, and you could use it on your, so many people have smartphones nowadays. You just pull your smartphone out, be out in the bee yard. Even though I don't know if you guys do you recommend actually going out to the yard, looking through and checking your hive and then coming back and using it? Or do you recommend using it right on the spot while you're in the hive? What do you think?
I think it depends on if you mind getting your device sticky, and also if you have if you have Wi-Fi connection.
Yeah, of course. Awesome. So Jamie was talking about the results and how there are different percentages associated to the results that you get. So I guess my question is, when I'm using, I won't say I use WebMD that often because I feel like sometimes people can go down a pretty serious dark hole and, decide that a little cut on their finger is going to be, they've got an hour or so left of life. But how accurate is BeeMD? Do you know how accurate it is?
Well, I think, you get at the end a probability, and there are some that will come out that, you've described the conditions for this particular situation. The color of the eyes that you see when you accidentally open up a capped cell, for example, because it changes, and some people get very concerned. I don't ever remember seeing it this chartreuse color. Where'd this come from? Is this normal? So I think some of them come out to be, you've identified what it is, and then we have a comment or two about whether this is serious or needs further attention or not. But there truly are some where it could be 2 or 3 or 4 different things, and you're probably going to have to do a little bit more digging. Perhaps you're going to need to bring in another tool, a diagnostic tool, or phone a friend, or find someone else that's seen the situation. Some of these things are more clear cut than others, but it does help you realize what might be the greatest probability of what it is that you're looking at. And I'll back up just one second on this and say that we love our lingo. We have all kinds of terms in bees and beekeeping, and we quickly try to immerse our students in those terms. And if for those users of the medical MD, you go in that, and quickly those terms pop up, and what does this term mean? What does that? In the BeeMD, we've sought to make it what you're seeing, and without overpowering with the lingo, so that you don't have to then run to a dictionary and try to figure out what does Snellgrove board mean, or something of that nature, or some of this very specific lingo that we use. And so I think that helps too with finally reaching a probability that, well, it's probably this, and since this is pretty serious, maybe I do need some more help or to do something more, versus, oh, that's what it is. Oh, that's interesting. And then go on.
I think, Amy, one of the keys to thinking about this is it assigns what we call a match score. And I don't understand necessarily the model behind it. That would be
too much math for you to think.
that would be Debbie's website contact specialist who developed the algorithm. But the idea is, you've checked things that this list matches 80% of what one would check if it has American foul brood, or it's a 50% match with varroa. And the key to the website is it's going to give you 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things that what you check matches. And that's the beauty of having Dewey on board, is now that you've got this list of 3, 4, or 5 things, you can click on each one of those and read more about it, which, just like Dewey said, will help you determine whether or not you need to enter additional information, or you need to phone a friend or email one of us or use some other diagnostic tool. So that's the key to kind of helping them hone down to what it is they think that they're seeing in the field.
And it could be very well possible that it's more than one thing, right? I mean, it's...
Oh, absolutely. In fact, it usually probably may be.
Yeah.
So incidentally, Debbie, I don't know how much Jordan did with the algorithm, but that's kind of my understanding of how the match system works as it is. Yep. So I think obviously this website will get better over time as beekeepers use it and report back to us and say, hey, I clicked on this, the BeeMD suggested these 3 things. I narrowed it down based on the text that you guys provided. I thought it was this, but it turned out to be this. So there's lots of opportunity for feedback, which really, Dewey and Debbie, kind of leads to my next question is, how can beekeepers help the BeeMD get better? And I can already think of a couple ways, but I'm curious for you guys, how can beekeepers help improve the BeeMD?
Well, gosh, I think just by using it, um, by using it and providing us feedback, just like you said. And I think one thing too, like if you really wanted to be a beekeeper to help improve the BeeMD, is take kind of know something that you know what it is in your colony, and then use the tool and see if you get to it. And that's a really good way to kind of ground truth, I guess, how well the symptoms and everything that you're clicking is leading to the diagnosis. And, especially just try it, especially at the kind of club level. I think it might be fun for clubs to kind of maybe explore using it as a group. And then providing feedback to any of us that can get it back to NAPSI, who can get it back to Jordan, where we can make different tweaks to the site. But I think just using it is probably the best way I can see.
I would second that. Using it and giving the feedback. Beekeeping is practiced around the world. This is not just for Florida or just for the East Coast. We have brought in experts from a number of places to try to help us for some of the stuff that we might not be seeing every day. We're not quite as familiar with. And those are beekeepers that will be finding those different things as well. So, encourage the feedback. That's the only way we're going to strengthen it. And very much, if you tried to do something through it and got frustrated, where were you at that point? What was the issue that you had? And it might be a fairly simple tweak on our part to help make it easier for the next person that comes along, or for you when you go back in again.
Yeah, I think that's great. One of the things I'll say for our international listeners, we try to develop this in a way that would actually be relevant to many of the conditions in the system, the things that you'll be seeing in your own colonies, regardless of where you are in the world. Debbie, you're spot on. This idea of ground truthing. If you know exactly what it is, kind of fill in the signs of disease or signs of whatever you're seeing and see if the BeeMD takes you there. Another thing I'll add to the great answers both of you gave is one of the things is we tried to do on the website is we tried to make it very pictorial. We wanted to show people examples of what it is that they might be saying. For example, K-wing. K-wing is that condition where the wings on one side of the bee's body become unhinged and they kind of display separately and the bee looks like the letter K. Well, when you just say K-wing to someone, they may not have a clue what in the world K-wing is. And so we try to provide a picture of a bee that has K-wing. So that brings me to a point. We need photographs. We want to photo document everything that can be seen in a bee colony so that when we say something like, well, are you seeing sunken cappings? Well, we provide you 4, 5, or 6 pictures of sunken cappings. If you read a book and someone says sunken cappings, it's always the one pic, right? It's the one picture. Well, what if yours don't quite match that? Well, for every condition that can be seen, we would love someday to have 5 or 10 images of it so that you can see it at different angles and different situations. So that what we're describing on the website, you can match to what you're seeing. And to make a long story short, we need images because we didn't have an infinitely large photo database. We need images.
I think that was our big gap, Jamie.
Exactly.
For a while, is that we didn't have pictures, and even maybe some of the pictures we had, there's probably better pictures that other people have of that condition.
That's right. And on the website, there's the opportunity for you, the user, to go and upload pictures. Hey, Jamie, you said K-wing, but I didn't think your image of K-wing was sufficient. Here's one I have. And we want to improve the website both with accuracy. Amy, you asked about that a little earlier. We want to make it more accurate. When it helps give matches, we want those matches to be, likely what's happening. But we also want it to be more informational, and we need to do that. The biggest thing that users can do besides use it and give us feedback is to provide images for many of these things for which we may not already have images, or certainly things that are underrepresented by maybe only 1 or 2 images.
Can I go into the weeds for a minute?
Absolutely.
So one thing that I was thinking about, and maybe we discussed this and my memory just stinks and I can't remember, but for some of the conditions, I remember when we were going through, and it's really hard to get a static image, of balling the queen or, bees kind of trembling or something outside of the entrance. It would be great to eventually have the capacity to get videos of behaviors because we do have some that are it's a behavioral kind of thing where you need to see it in action. So that might be something maybe in the future. I can't remember if we discussed that or not.
So Debbie, I think that's brilliant. And so if you are a listener and you have tons of money and want to fund adaptations and updates for the BeeMD, let us know if you're a funding agency. But I certainly hear your point, Debbie. I think it would be great to be able to add video of behaviors, and because there's really no substitute for that. I agree with you completely that could greatly improve the website. That's a really good comment. So guys, the biggest way that the BeeMD can be a success is if you use it. One of the things that I don't think we've mentioned up until this point, but the BeeMD.com is free. It's free for you to use. We are not charging anything. It's just put together by, scientists and funding agencies as a decision support tool for you, the beekeepers. That's it. We made it as a resource for you. So we hope you use it and provide us feedback. We've had two great guests here with us today. They were Dr. Dewey Caron, who's a professor emeritus of the Entomology and Wildlife Ecology Department at University of Delaware. He's now an affiliate faculty member at Oregon State University. And Dr. Debbie Delaney, who's an associate professor of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Delaware. Dewey, Debbie, thank you guys so much for joining us and talking about the BeeMD.
Thank you, Amy, for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Glad to do it.
Thank
We
you
loved
so much.
having you on. And users, if you like the BeeMD, when you bump into Debbie or Dewey or some of our funding partners who you can see on the website, or Dennis Van Ingelsdorp, who was also in on this from the beginning, if you bump into one of those guys, thank them for the effort. It's been a lot of hard work, but hopefully it'll be worth it for you. And please use it and let us know what you think.
For additional resources, visit the podcast page on our website, ufhoneybee.com.
One of the things that I like to tell beekeepers when they're getting into beekeeping is they'll always ask me what is important for them to get started. And I, say, well, it's the basic stuff. It helps to have a mentor. It helps to work bees. It helps to, read a lot about them. But to me, beekeepers, especially as they advance in their beekeeping skill sets and years, they really need to be a part of their local, state, and national beekeeping associations. To me, there is such great value to being in a beekeepers association. A lot of beekeepers will do local, fewer, but still some will do state, and then fewer still, but still a lot will do, national. And I feel that the national beekeeper associations have a lot to offer beekeepers. And we're very fortunate today because we're being joined by Chris Hiatt, who's a commercial beekeeper, but not only is he a commercial beekeeper, but he's the vice president of the American Honey Producers Association. And we're going to talk with Chris about what this national beekeeping association can do or has been doing on behalf of beekeepers around the U.S. So, Amy, I hope you're ready to hear this. I don't know if you've ever been to an AHPA meeting, but I know that they do a lot for beekeepers. Chris, it's great to have you. Thank you for joining us on Two Bees in a Podcast.
Oh, thanks, guys. This is great.
Absolutely. So, Chris, what we always do when we try to, when we get started, we recognize you're a commercial beekeeper. We recognize you're the vice president of the American Honey Producers Association. But
We want to hear your story.
Yeah, that's it. Before we get into any of that, I'm curious, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into beekeeping, what you do as a beekeeper, et cetera, before we kind of launch into your role with the American Honey Producers Association and what they do for beekeepers?
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in a beekeeping family. So I guess I'm second generation. I could have been fourth generation because my great-grandfather brought some of the very first bee hives out west in the mid-1850s to Utah, and he was a pretty good nurseryman, and he brought 50 hives, but his son, my grandfather, he just farmed. And then it skipped a generation. So I could have been fourth generation. I guess I'm third generation once removed.
That's amazing. It skipped him though. If he actually stayed a farmer, because it seems like at least some hives on the side for a hobby would have been something that he did. That's interesting.
Yeah, no, it was. But he lost, my grandfather lost the farm in Idaho during the Great Depression. And they ended up moving to Eastern Oregon into the sagebrush because they set up a new irrigation project there. And that's where my dad was born. And my dad went to school and was not making much money on the farm in the summers. And he jumped in and bought a beekeeper out in Washington State, Ephrata, Washington. That's where me and my 5 brothers were all born. So my dad had a perfect working crew, 6 boys. And so that's what I grew up in my summers in North Dakota, extracting, pulling honey, putting bees in and out of apples in Washington State. And now I graduated. I went to school. I graduated from Brigham Young University, a degree in horticulture, and then they said, "Hey, not every day someone hands you a family business." So there's me and 2 brothers here in California. There's 3 brothers in Washington State, and everybody goes to North Dakota for the summer. So we pretty much run those 3 states. Almonds.
Wow.
All 6 of you are still beekeepers?
They're one of them's not anymore.
Okay.
But
is he the black
5
sheep?
of us, yeah.
That is so awesome. That's really cool.
So yeah, I mean, sometimes it's decision by committee or decision by wrestling match, but we get a lot of stuff done, and it's good that, is all one person that trained us, my dad. So we all work bees pretty much the same, and so it's worked out.
That's really neat. Well, how did you end up becoming affiliated with the American Honey Producers Association? It says here you're the vice president, so I'm assuming you've been involved for some time in order to make it to that position.
Well, my dad he was at the meeting when ABF and AHPA separated. So my dad's always been involved.
Okay.
But he's not too involved like with leadership wise, because he was just by himself with a few managers trying to grow his company. But we were running probably 5,000 to 10,000 hives. And then when all the brothers got into the business, we went up to 20,000 hives. And we had a big crash in 2004. That was when the Kumafos, the bear strip, stopped working.
Sure.
You just put it in once a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the AHPA stand in 2003, we noticed it really didn't, that once a year didn't work very good. So we had a huge crash. We're like, we ought to get involved and see what's the deal. So we went to the Tucson meeting. Yeah, I think it was 04, 05. I can't remember. So ever since then, we've been involved. But just the last 5-6 years, I've been on the executive board for the honey producers. And I mean, you learn just as much as you do in the hallway as you do in the speaker sessions. And we've made a lot of good family friends and longtime friends there. So it's just a good feeling going. It's almost like seeing family every year when you go to one of those meetings.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love, different industries. You just become family, and camaraderie is such a big thing. I mean, it's very difficult to work bees and be a beekeeper, whether you're backyard commercial or sideliner, without interacting or meeting people. That's part of the experience, right? Having a mentor. So I was wondering if you could tell us about the American Honey Producers Association. So what do you guys do? What is the association about? And what do you guys focus on?
Well, we're a group with over 600 members, and we represent a good chunk of the hives represented in the United States, and definitely more than half of the honey produced in the United States. And we really focus on issues that affect commercial beekeepers and the profitability of beekeepers. Over the last few years being involved, one of the biggest things probably that sticks out is the Emergency Livestock Assistance Program, ELAP. You guys probably know about it.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah. So when it started, we were just, because there was really nothing, we really don't have anything like row crop and other farmers. So they just threw us into this program, and it was paying like 50 cents on the dollars for, on your losses. Mm-hmm. The losses, they've switched the losses from 19% to 21%. They're supposed to be based on historical average, but we finally got the program uncapped in 2017. So like in 2016, there's 15 million paid out to beekeepers in the United States. 2017 was 33 million, 29.5 million, 2018. I don't have last year's number. But so it's really helped. And I know even one of our board members from Louisiana that he probably wouldn't be in business if he didn't have that ELAP program that he was starting off after working for years for a big outfit. He started his own beekeeping company, and without that ELAP, he probably would have been out of business. So that's a big program. I think it's helped. What else? Though the honey issue, that's a huge issue that we've been working on. A recent success, though, we got $1.5 million appropriated through Congress to customs, and we worked on this really hard for years. And so now finally, customs will have nuclear magnetic resonance testing, which is the most up-to-date testing for fraudulent honey. And they were using some 17-year-old technology. So that we're excited about that, and hopefully that'll help some of the fraudulent honey and some of the funny honey coming in from Asia, stop that from coming in and hopefully raise our honey prices up. And then over the years, almost everybody knows that we had an anti-dumping action back in 2001, and that's helped a lot of Sue Bee members, a lot of members of our group, that you get a bird amendment payment, which is some money that when the Chinese honey come in, it has to have it. There's a tariff on it. And so that is given, not what it used to be, but it's given money to some of the hurt parties, which is the commercial beekeepers. But the recent thing that we talked about our convention was that we've worked on was the commercial item description. We could never get a standard of identity. I guess the olive oil industry kind of ruined it. FDA mentioned that there's even some California olive growers that could never even meet their own standard. So they just got out of that business. But the next best thing was this commercial item description to describe how long you can heat honey. Is it still raw? If you heat it for how much time, at what temperature, and all these different guidelines. So that's really helped. And so now the next step, the USDA has encouraged us to, now update your labeling laws, which haven't been updated like 1985. And one thing that I kind of want to do in our group is we kind of want to copy Canada, because they've switched to Canada #1 and #1. So if there's Canadian honey in it, it's Canada #1, just Canadian 100%. And if it's a blend or something else, or all foreign, it's just #1. So I would love to do something like, instead of this, because USDA grade A is so, I don't know, it doesn't mean much anymore. So if it's 100% American honey, USDA grade A. If it's a blend, USDA grade B or something like that, or USA 1 or #1, just, I don't know, something copy the Canadian. But that's one thing we're working on this year. And there's a group called the Honey Integrity Task Force that we started that has some packers, importers, representatives from SUE, from American Beekeeping Federation, us, and we're in a room trying to hash out the differences, trying to test more honey. And so that's been an eye opener, and it's been hopefully we'll get something done with that group.
Sure, that sounds like a lot of different projects. I had no idea, actually. I don't think I realized. Yeah.
So Chris, at AHPA, did you guys? I don't know if you heard about it, but the World Honey Competition, 46% of the honey samples didn't make it because they were adulterated.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Oh wow.
So it's a lot more. There's a lady that interviewed me this past year from Vice, and she on her own went and tested a bunch of honey, and just her article showed that it's not as clean, as good as you think it is.
So Chris, I want to talk about this for just a second. The title is the American Honey Producers Association, and I think that's pretty neat. When I was listening to you chat about all of this, except I'm looking down my list because I made notes on all the stuff that you said. The only thing that doesn't directly deal with honey production is ELAP. Everything else is strictly related to honey. And so I think this is interesting because when we go to beekeeper meetings, the talk is all pollination. What are we getting for pollination prices? And honey's kind of the afterthought. And it's really neat to hear you talk about all the things that you guys are doing on behalf of honey. And so some of our listeners out there may not be overly familiar with the problem of fraudulent or adulterated or honey coming from Asia, because if there's a huge honey dump into the U.S. market, then the prices go significantly down and make it very difficult for beekeepers who are producing honey here in the USA to compete. Could you talk a little bit about that, just to kind of help put everything else into context that you've discussed so far?
Well, we're just finding that a lot of the Chinese honey, to avoid the tariffs, are just coming in through India and Vietnam. And so it's called transshipment. And there's also another issues of just these honey laundering factories. They're using something called resin technology, where they're scrubbing the honey, removing the antibiotics, removing, Roundup, whatever. And it's basically, it's not honey at that. By Codex Alimentarius, the European Codex, it's not honey by definition anymore. They're removing all the pollen. It's a sweetener. But that resin tech stuff is coming into the market. It's being blended with our honey. I mean, that's one of the big things it's just upsetting, is that everything, you go on the shelf, it's clover honey, it's clover honey. You have all these different shades of clover honey. And we've lost kind of, the wine industry's done awesome. Like, hey, look at this, go look at this variety, and da-da-da-da. It's too bad we couldn't have the same United States. Oh, look at this is orange or fireweed or, Tupelo or whatever it is, instead of just everything being blended into one little, one group. And plus it's foreign, plus with American honey. So we always tell everybody, please buy American honey. You're supporting American beekeepers, which is actually in the interest of our national defense to keep our food supply, safe. And we talk about pollination a lot at our meetings, because almonds are huge, and we talk about H2A visa program and what we do for that. And we talk about the e-log, the electronic log books, and how we're trying to, keep trucks on the road and not having to stop with a load of bees when it's 95 degrees out. So there's a lot of stuff besides the honey too.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It almost seems like more work stripping the honeys than it is to actually just harvest and sell it, right? It just seems like it's a lot more time and resources. But, my thing is always to buy local. Like every time we always get a question, where do we find good honey? And I say, find a reputable source, go to your local farmer's market or meet your local beekeeper and buy honey from them. There's, if you trust them, then there's no way that it could be alterated at all. But I think, for the sake of our listeners, a lot of them are wondering, when they go to a grocery store or when they're going to, I know when I go to like a local Ace Hardware, they usually sell honey, right? And so they have a label. So what is the process of actually the honey labeling guidelines right now? What does it mean? What are we looking for when we're going out to purchase honey?
Yeah, I'm no expert on it, but you're supposed to have the grade, USDA grade A, almost everything is USDA grade A on the front, and the country of origin and legible lettering. And that is what we're seeing is a huge issue. Some packers are putting it on the back or the bottom or the top, and it's not, sometimes you can't even read it. And sometimes it's 6 or 7 countries long. And then we'll test it and you'll find it's like 99.9% Vietnamese, even though it's listing like 7 different countries. So yeah, that's one thing we're working on. California State Beekeepers, we're working with them this year. They're trying to tackle that because California has actually a pretty good standard of identity, their state from years ago. So I think if we could just try to get the blending being branded, or a different grade for blending versus 100% American, we could really do that, because the consumer is confused when they see that USDA grade A. They probably think it's all American honey, where that bottle could be, almost 100% all foreign or whatever. So,
well, and also what about, education? So educating the consumers and also educating, I guess the bigger boxed stores that may be purchasing some of this. Do you think that would be a possibility as far as just educating the consumers?
Yeah. We're trying to do that. We have a campaign going, and we actually have just launched an app. It's just the AHPA app, where we're encouraging our members or anybody to take it takes the picture and it goes to this database, and we're going to have this big, repository of data to show good labels and bad labels, just as proof when we go to DC to say, hey, this is our problems, this is our issues. So the app you can take a picture and download a good label or a fraudulent label. I know there's a lot of people in the American Bee Journal, there was a good article last year about someone in Pennsylvania, at the farmer's market testing his competitors' honey. It was all from like Southern California or something. It wasn't even local Pennsylvania honey. And then another competitor was Asian honey or something. So, this is a huge issue. And yeah, pollination is huge. And for the first time this past year, pollination passed honey for income. for the average American beekeeper on the NASS data. So that, I mean, we know that pollination is growing, but there's so many beekeepers that you still need a good price for your honey to stay in business.
Sure. Yeah, and that the AHPA app, I actually, I think that's how I found your information. I received an email and I sent it out to my commercial beekeepers listserv to be a part of that and take part and to take pictures of the honey labels. So I'm pretty excited to share that with everybody.
So Chris, you're saying so many things that make me want to ask like a zillion questions. I'm trying to temper my enthusiasm here because there's so many points I want to make. But when I first got to Florida, the Florida State Beekeepers Association was having what they believed kind of was a similar issue, and so they did get a standard of identity for honey. I wasn't aware that there were issues with it on the national level, like for olive oil that you had mentioned. But that was one of the big pushes that the FSBA wanted to do, was to define what honey is. And a lot of it was to help with this adulteration process. When I was, I've been keeping bees since I was 12. This was not an academic pursuit for me originally. It's what I like to do. I still have a couple colonies in my backyard. So when I was a kid, I already knew, a lot about honey and what it was, et cetera. And there were some places in the mountains of Georgia where I'm from that I would travel, and they would sell sour wood honey. And sour wood was two different words, whereas we know that the actual tree from which the bees produce sour wood was one word. And basically what they were trying to do was get around, making the claim that it was actually sour wood honey. It was sour wood honey. And that was my first introduction to kind of sneaky label language to try to get around issues. But you mentioned something that really just stuck with me and resonated. So my family and I did a sabbatical in Germany a few years ago, and we were there for 6 months. And the EU, the European Union, if I'm not mistaken, has rules that when a package claims it as something, it has to be that something. For example, I happen to be a consumer of meat. I'm a carnivore, as it were. And in Germany, they have a lot of sausages and other meats. And one of the things that they have there is Black Forest ham. Well, here in the States, they slap Black Forest ham on absolutely everything when it's as far as possible from the actual Black Forest ham. And in Europe, if the package says Black Forest ham, it has to have come from there, produced the way that it's supposed to be produced for Black Forest ham. In other words, all US-based Black Forest hams would essentially fail the test. So it was interesting to me that there was that level, if it says it's this type of thing, it has to be from there. And if it's not from there, done the way it's traditionally done, that has to be noted on the package. So that leads me kind of a long story to get to this point. You had mentioned, seeing these labels that might have 7 countries listed, but there's one country that's the predominant honey or these dumping issues. My question to you is there precedent from other countries that we could follow in the U.S. for the packaging or the appropriate packaging of honey? Like in the European Union, they have, Black Forest ham is from the Black Forest in Germany, produced the way it's, historically been produced. So is there precedent like this that the AHPA has been using or can use to lobby for these stricter label guidelines?
Well, yeah, probably the thing I think of first is the whole Manuka honey. So from, New Zealand and Australia, exactly. It commands such a higher price. And there's already been lawsuits against Trader Joe's, I believe, because they were claiming it was 50 proof. I mean, it's almost like, it's 25 proof, 50 proof, 75 proof, and you have to have tested, see how much pollen to prove how much Manuka is actually in it. So that, that's kind of one thing we're looking at for some of these more expensive varieties, like like you'd mentioned, sourwood, basswood, tupelo, fireweed, whatever, to prove actually is it actually what you're saying. But like I mentioned, the Canadians, I think just having a more honest labeling law, less confusing would help. But we have to remember everything needs money, so there's no enforcement. A lot of the times we're like, well, we can do this, but who's going to enforce it? Exactly. FDA is so overwhelmed, and they've told us in DC in the past, if this is not a human health risk, we really don't care. But there is some traction now about food fraud, and we've worked with this Dr. Michael Roberts from UCLA, who's helped us and write a white paper on, and we're using in DC to say, hey, this is a food fraud and it's actually hurting the endangered American honey producer. This is a national security interest. So please look into this and help us.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of it comes down to money if people are going to actually enforce it. But I mean, it's probably competitors more than anything that'll be called out or lawsuits.
Sure. I think it's so crazy, that we look at a label and we just assume that that's what it should be, right? So Jamie, when you're talking about the Black Forest ham, it's just so funny. Like anyone going to a grocery store here would want to look at a label, and that's what we do. We look at ingredients, we look at a label, and we assume that it's exactly what it should be, right? So it's just, I think it's just very strange that we're having this conversation to begin with, but of course we've got to start somewhere as far as moving forward, and I do think that education is important, but it's
Amy, label honesty, right? If it's on the label, you think that's what you're getting, but label honesty is a trick. And like I said, I harken back to my sour wood days when I was like, I looked at that jar of honey, said, "There's no way that the color's off." I was like, so I bought it to taste it, and it tasted more like, I would say corn syrup, but I don't want to go too far down that road.
That's fair. That's fine. All right. So Chris, you've kind of told us a bit about what AHPA does for beekeepers. And so I'm just wondering, who can be a part of this association? How can people get involved? Is it only for commercial beekeepers? Would I be able to join it? I'm going to be the next president. You'll see.
No, that's totally fine. You can have it. No, anybody can be a member. Anybody. We have sideline, we have smaller guys, we have some from New Hampshire, Vermont, we've got all across the United States. And our executive board, we've had all across Mississippi, Louisiana, New York, South Dakota, North Dakota, California, Texas. It's a pretty diverse group. But yeah, one thing that you're not going to like, Amy, is that you have to pay your way everywhere you go. It's every time you go to DC, you got to pay your flight. And we've
I'll just make Jamie pay for that.
Whoa. I'm not agreed to this.
Everyone sign up for Bee College. Just kidding.
We have researchers. So anybody can be a member. But a voting member, you have to have some hives.
Well, Chris, I want to make sure that we get the news out, because a lot of people constantly ask, what does this group do for me? What does my state association do for me? What can I get from the American Beekeeping Federation? What can I get from the American Honey Producers Association? What can I get from this group or that group? So you went down a list, and I just want to make sure and read it again, and you can tell me if there's anything that I've missed that you guys have done for the beekeepers here just in the past decade. You got the ELAP program, the Emergency Livestock Assistance Program, uncapped in 2017 to make it possible for more beekeepers to recover more money for their losses. All this honey-related stuff that you've mentioned. Again, honey is in the title of your association, American Honey Producers Association. So, for example, you've got more money appropriated through Congress to customs so that nuclear magnetic resonance imaging testing for fraudulent honey can be available. You've dealt with anti-dumping issues, which is where countries are just, putting a lot of honey into our market. Countries from all over the world putting honey in our market, which lowers the honey prices that you guys are able to get. You couldn't work necessarily to get a standard of identity. You gave olive oil as an example of something that didn't work so well. So instead, you guys were thinking about a commercial item description that you're working on at the moment. You specifically like the way Canada does it. If it's honey produced from Canadian beekeepers from hives in Canada, it's called Canada 1. If it's a blend or includes foreign honey, it's called just number 1. And then you mentioned this app that you guys have developed recently where you can take pictures of labels, which will upload it to provide you guys the data necessary to lobby for the changes that you hope to have. So these are just kind of some of the upper level things that you guys have done for beekeepers. It just sounds like you guys have done a lot on behalf of beekeepers and the honey production industry in general.
Yeah, and then I'd probably throw in research. We've gotten over the last 5-10 years more and more money for the ARS labs across the United States. And there's a lot of our board members that are on the hiring process there's a new lab going to be down in Stoneville, Mississippi, and they're hiring right now. So we were part of the ribbon cutting for UC Davis this last year in January. That was exciting. That was a big push that we had been pushing for years, to actually have an ARS lab in California for almonds, because it's so many bees come to California. Another interesting one, it kind of goes along with one of your podcasts I listened to last week about tallow and the invasives. We have so many members that go to the South for tallow, and they're up in arms about the eradication of this flea beetle that they want to release.
Yep, sure.
And how important it is as a honey float. And the same thing in New York for like knotweed and just a lot, loosestrife. And you can go down the list where in New York, it actually, they had a biological was released, and it took out the loosestrife, but it took out like the reeds in the marsh, and the worst invasive replaced it. So it ended up making it worse for the beekeepers and worse for the environment.
Wow.
So we hired a biopolicy consultant to help us with that. And we've written, and we were in the talks with APHIS about this release. And another interesting thing is about Forest Service in the West. We've had some permits denied by some of our members, long-standing permits in Forest Service for bee yards. And they're quoting the Xerces Society saying that honeybees are outcompeting the natives. And so same person we use for that, we use the consultant to write up some multi-use and rights for that. We should have access to this federal land. And we have a study that's going to be coming on here this summer between natives and non-natives. And that's a huge issue. And we've had very interesting meetings going to DC talking to Forest Service and how little beehives are actually accessing the 190 million acres of forest ground. So we're like less than 0.1% of how many bees are on that land. And that's, and it's funny that you'll have one government agency say, we probably ought to charge you more for these bee yards because we know they're clean acres up in the forest. And then we'll have EPA tell us, no, the mites are your problem. It's not pesticides because everything in farmland is fine. So we're like, no, wait a second. One group's telling us these are clean acres that we should be worth more. We have another group saying, oh, no, it's all mites. It's not pesticide. So it's really interesting working with these federal agencies trying to get something done. It's an uphill battle too.
Chris, I mean, you're mentioning things that are things that we have had to deal with here kind of on the local level, just like you guys, but in our case, for decades too. If we think about when I first got to Florida, again, beekeepers were really wanting to put bees on state lands exactly for the very reason that you said, because there are a lot of honey producing nectar bearing plants there. They wanted to get there. But there are some individuals who made exactly the same comment. Well, this is going to be bad for native bees or whatever. And so there's certainly been this conflict. And then you mentioned a little bit earlier about the invasive species. As you know, here in Florida, we use Brazilian pepper as an example in that particular podcast episode you're talking about, to kind of say to the beekeepers, hey, this is a reality. People are moving on these things. And we know honey producers in other parts of the country have their own invasive species that they have to deal with. And so these are growing issues, and it's nice to know that you guys, these things are on your dash and you're aware of them, and you guys are already proactively doing things to address them. It's neat that you've added this to the list. And one thing I appreciate most of all, really, as a researcher, is that you guys support research, and that you're, for example, in the case of the USDA, lobbying to grow those labs and get more funding for those USDA labs. So that's really neat that you guys have taken that on and making it one of the things that you do.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's every year, except for this year. This is the first year because of COVID. We didn't go to DC in May. We usually go May and sometimes October. So yeah, this was weird not going this year.
Well, Chris, thank you so much. Listeners, you were listening to Chris Hiatt, who's a commercial beekeeper and vice president of the American Honey Producers Association. He's spent some time with us today on our podcast just to let you know what the American Honey Producers Association does for you on behalf of beekeepers all around the U.S., whether you knew it was happening or not. So, Chris, I'm assuming that you mentioned to Amy that anybody can sign up to be a member. I guess they can find that information out on your website.
Yep. So a lot of people have said it's the greatest secret in beekeeping. What? American Honey Producers? You don't know what you're doing. So yeah, we're trying to get our information out more. We have an e-blast that goes out twice a month to our members, and there's stuff on Facebook being posted, but yeah, it's on our website. You can sign up. And we hope to be in Baton Rouge in December. Okay. If the COVID thing calms down, but we're moving forward. The mayor told us it looks good, and the American Bee Research Conference should be with us too. So it all moves forward.
What I'd say then, Chris, is that we're going to make a point to put links to your website in our show notes so people listening to this podcast can find out more about the American Honey Producers Association by clicking on the link and going and browsing your website, and consider joining as a member. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today on Two Bees in a Podcast.
Yep, thank you guys.
It's everybody's favorite game show, Stump the Chump.
Okay, it is at question and answer time. Jamie, I've got 3 questions for you, and they all kind of seem to relate to each other in one way or another. So
Okay,
I think they're pretty
looking
practical, good questions, which all of them actually have been. So
Too late. You already said it. You basically said everybody
Sorry.
else's questions stink.
So someone was asking, they've seen and heard a lot of chatter about growing resistance to amitraz, and this is related to varroa. So is there any science on this, and what does it say? Is there amitraz resistance happening?
So there is absolutely amitraz resistance happening. Now, that should not alarm beekeepers who are super concerned, but the idea is that if you use something too much, an insect or a mite pest will likely become resistant to it. In this case, the mite varroa has been exposed to amitraz for multiple decades by this point. You know, it's a compound of choice for many commercial beekeepers around the U.S., and, you know, there was some rumors that there might be pockets of resistance. So there are some scientists, especially Dr. Frank Rinkovich, for example, at the USDA in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He's been traveling the country trying to study this. And so I'm very aware of his work. I'm also aware of some other individuals who've seen similar things. I would say that it's not necessarily super widespread and super rampant that we need to be worried that we're going to lose amitraz tomorrow. But I will say that it certainly raises some alarms that the one thing that beekeepers have been using a lot of the last decade could very well lose its efficacy here in the next 5 to 10 years, which is very alarming for the commercial beekeeping industry. And a lot of commercial beekeepers have been unwilling to believe this or listen to it. I know that when we suggested it some time ago, we got our chops busted for it, but the data are definitely starting to trend that there are at least pockets of resistance.
Okay, well, that leads me to the next question then. So what does that mean when beekeepers are talking about mite resistance? And, you know, there are all these terms that are being thrown out, like varroa sensitivity, etc.
Yeah, so there's a lot to consider here with regard to this. When I first started keeping bees, fluvalinate, AHPA was the product that we used against varroa. And anytime an industry relies very heavily on one compound, number one, and in instances when the compound is misused, number two, you set up the stage for resistance. So the industry was heavily relying on fluvalinate. You know, it's this kind of mindset. If the label says that 6 weeks is how long you leave those plastic strips in, well, heck, 12 weeks might be twice as good. So, you know, those kinds of things. I remember at the time when I was working colonies, I would routinely find 4 AHPA strips in people's boxes when there's clearly the label only said 2. So it's things like this that ultimately led to resistance. Then they moved to using Coumaphos. The common product was Checkmite. And so, as you might guess, varroa ultimately became resistant to Checkmite. In fact, there's been some reversion to susceptibility to fluvalinate. There are times when you can use AHPA and might get a control for 1 or 2 times in a particular year, but Coumaphos is still, you know, varroa is still quite resistant to it. And then, of course, burst onto the scene amitraz, and we've talked about it already. But what happens is when these mites get exposed to this stuff over a long period of time, especially in low or inappropriately used doses, the mites can become resistant. And so we've got these other compounds, these more secondary killers of varroa, things like thymol that you'll see in APA or some of these other things that beekeepers are using. And a lot of these are pretty good controls for varroa, but not so great, which is what kept beekeepers wanting to look for more compounds. So, you know, fast forward to this idea that, well, maybe we can breed these resistance or tolerance traits into bees. And so there's been a lot of work all over the country and in other places around the world, for that matter, where people are trying to breed honeybee strains that are tolerant of varroa. It simply means that varroa are present in the colony, but the bees don't seem to be suffering as a result of those varroa present. And honestly, when you get these resistant strains, there could be a few reasons that these bees are resistant to varroa. Perhaps you can groom the varroa off of them or chew the varroa very easily, or perhaps there's this hygienic behavior expressed where they remove varroa and the individual immature bee that the varroa is feeding on. So there's been these breeding programs that have kind of steered in that direction. Unfortunately, I would argue that a lot of the honeybee strains that are used across the United States are not resistant to varroa. They are very susceptible strains, which means if varroa get in there, the bees are going to die unless you do something to address it. So we definitely need more adoption of these varroa tolerant or varroa resistant stocks.
Yeah. So when you're talking about varroa resistant stocks, I guess it's intertwined with queen and queen breeding and whatnot. And so I'm wondering, where would someone be able to find queens that were resistant to, or not resistant, but resistant to some of the problems.
Yeah, so it's tricky because there's only a few main strains produced in the U.S. that a lot of effort has gone into. For example, the Minnesota hygienic strain. This is a strain of Italian honeybees that the University of Minnesota, Marla Spivak and her team spent a lot of work in a couple decades ago, producing a line of bee, a strain of bee that's quite hygienic. And hygienic behavior is simply where worker bees can detect varroa in capped brood cells, uncap those brood cells, and remove the varroa and the developing bee that's in that brood cell. And so you get an instance here where this trait has been bred into this strain. And Marla and her team did a great job. So Minnesota Hygienic, the USDA Bee Lab, their breeding lab there in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, they've spent a lot of time working with Russian honeybees. They've also spent a lot of time working on other lines like varroa-sensitive hygiene lines, or the pole line, which is a line that beekeepers are going to hear more about. We've got Sue Colby and others working with New World Carniolans. And what I tell people is we have these strains, these Russian bees, these Minnesota hygienic, these pole lines, etc., these VSH. What I tell people to do is if you're interested in using one of those strains of bees, go to the individual or individuals who've created that bee. Marla, in the Minnesota hygienic case, that's Marla Spivak. In the Russian bee case, that's the Baton Rouge lab. And ask those individuals where they can purchase bees that most represent those strains. It's funny. It's no mystery. I could basically claim to have Minnesota hygienic bees in my backyard and sell Minnesota hygienic queen, but there's no requirement for me to demonstrate that I, in fact, have that trait. So I always tell people, go straight to the source. Yeah. Ask, there happens to be a Russian Queen Breeders Association, for example. Ask those guys and gals, who is trying to maintain the original stock appropriately. Ask, the University of Minnesota staff, who's trying to maintain the Minnesota hygienic line appropriately, and then use the queen breeders those individuals suggest, because then you can feel pretty good that those stocks have been maintained to the level that those university or USDA folks believe is sufficient to have these traits. I'll tell you, I did some research when I was a postdoc at the University of Georgia on the Russian bees, for an example, and we found a really, really good impact of using these bees on productivity, survivorship, as well as mite tolerance. They simply were able to keep mite populations low for long periods of time. So I would say that if you get a hold of a good stock that's got a lot of research behind it and that it's maintained appropriately in the hands of the queen breeders, you really can help your bees, fight varroa. And I personally believe breeding bees and the adoption of these stocks or strains that have these traits is really part of the future of beekeeping. It frustrates the willies out of me that our industry hasn't embraced it to the level that I feel that we should have embraced. It shouldn't even be an afterthought. This is just something we should do. And it's not. It's just sad to me.
Yeah. And it's really interesting. The industry is actually a lot smaller, I think, that people would expect. To be able to go directly to the source is just, that's great. I think that's really great.
Absolutely. One of the problems, though, that people have is that, everybody and their brother or sister can sell queen bees. And so it's hard to separate the noise from the truth, and which is why I always say, hey, go straight to the source of the bee. Ask the bee lab in Baton Rouge, where can I buy these lines that you would bet? And I'll make, another comment is these queens are going to cost you more. They tend to be more expensive than just the queens that are, for lack of a better term, run of the mill or unselected, et cetera. So they expect to pay a little bit more. But if you use them don't continue your varroa treatment regimen as you did as if you didn't have them. The whole purpose of using these is to alleviate some of the burden of treating, for example, using amitraz. So you really need to couple stock use with monitoring for varroa to determine when treatment's necessary. Keep in mind that, treatment will be necessary. These things don't usually eliminate the need for varroa treatment altogether. It just may reduce your need to do it 3 times a year to once a year. And the last thing I'll say, and I know I'm kind of going long on this, but I think it's very important, is when you use these stocks, you need to commit to them, because a lot of beekeepers will purchase them, put them into their colonies, and their colonies will go queenless, and they'll allow a new queen to be made, and they'll say, don't worry, the traits are still there. But requeened colonies can lose these traits quickly because they're open mating. So you really need to commit to it. And what do I mean by that? I say if you're going to use a resistant stock, you need to purchase queens from the source and requeen your colonies every year, under the assumption that most of your colonies will have requeened within a year from those queens that you originally purchased. So you need to be bringing in this stock continually, unless you live on an island and you're the only beekeeper there.
Yep, that's fair. All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for all of your questions and comments. And don't forget to rate us on some of the podcast apps out there and review us on our Facebook and other social media sources. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Two Bees in a Podcast. We would like to give an extra special thank you to our audio engineer, James Weaver, and to our podcast coordinator, Jacqueline INJ. Without their hard work, Two Bees in a Podcast would not be possible.
For more information and additional resources for today's episode, don't forget to visit the UF-IFAS Honeybee Research and Extension Laboratory's website, ufhoneybee.com. Do you have questions you want answered on air? If so, email them to honeybee@ifas.ufl.edu or message us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at UF Honeybee Lab. While there, don't forget to follow us. Thank you for listening to Two Bees in a Podcast.